Hi, my name's Sarah Thomas Moffat. I am a cinematographer. That's what I am, and I can't imagine doing anything else. I am a story creator, and I love collaborating, and it is my turn to work on bigger productions that are supported in a scripted and narrative space, and that's what I want.
Hello and welcome to the season premiere of Art, the podcast where we get to know women from around the world of visual arts. And that includes painters, cinematographers, ceramicists, filmmakers, sculptors, camera operators, makeup artists, photographers, botanical artists and producers, as well as a whole lot more. And you can find 90 episodes already of seasons 1 and 2 of Art on any podcast app. I'm Chris Stafford, and I'm delighted you've joined us for this new season of Art, and I hope you'll invite others to join us too if you think they might enjoy the show. We have a terrific roster of guests lined up for you for 2025. So let's get started. My guest this week on the Season 3 premiere is the cinematographer Sarah Thomas Moffat. Sarah's work has spanned across all genres, from documentaries to factual, commercial, and now with a focus on scripted. Her productions have aired worldwide, including on CBC, the History Channel, CTV, Hulu, and Netflix. Sarah was the first woman to run as a racer cam operator on the Canadian reality competition show Amazing Race Canada. She's won multiple awards across genres, including Film Festival Awards for Best Cinematography, along with 3 CSC nominations. Sarah's parents emigrated from Scotland to Canada shortly before Sarah was born in Toronto. As a child, she developed an interest in still photography through her artistic parents, which led to Sarah studying film, radio, TV broadcasting at Centennial College in Ontario. She describes herself at that time as focused and determined when she realised that this was her calling and she could make a career as a cinematographer. Sarah is a dual citizen of Canada and the UK, and she's a member of the IATSE, a CSC Associate Member, on ASC Vision Mentee Alumni, and Illuminatrix DOP, based in London. Sarah, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking time to do this, because I know it's been a bit of a rough week with you. You got a bit sick, but welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thank you. Very excited to be here and to kick off 2025. And this is a great start to the year. Thanks for having me, Chris.
You're very, very welcome. Well, we have talked a little bit before, so I know you were made in Scotland, but you're also Canadian now, and then you're UK-based as well. Your job literally takes you anywhere you need to go, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Quite nomadic.
What was last year like for you?
Last year, 2024 was very nomadic. In fact, I was more relocating into the UK. I have been a UK citizen forever and tried to expand my career there previously. However, access was different. The industry was different than the North American industry. It was before streaming sites, before the internet really kicked in. And so I sort of stayed on the Canadian, North American side, doing a lot of factual and documentary content because I was getting access to it and I was making a living and helping out with 2 of my grandparents that had immigrated to Canada in their old age and the family things. And so 2024 became a year of spreading my wings. And that really also started in 2022, 2023, post-pandemic. So yeah, 2024 was a great year of expansion for me.
Did you kind of catch up after the effects of the pandemic? Because that hit the industry so hard, Sarah.
Unfortunately, no. And I know that's the case for many, many people in the film industry. And, you know, on top of that, right now we're watching the essentially the decimation of fires and the result of that in Hollywood and Los Angeles and Southern California, where a lot of my friends and work colleagues are, and I hold that place very dear to my heart. So yeah, it's the film industry has taken a massive, massive hit. Pandemic, strikes, not really bouncing back in 2024, trying to find that rhythm, and now this. So it's definitely an industry for people who are resilient, and I certainly am.
Well, yes, you certainly need to be, don't you? And I'm glad you mentioned the fires and the tragedy out there in LA. As you say, it's really, really hit the industry as well. I know production has come to a standstill. Again, lots of your friends, lots of people, and I know too, having been over there in the industry, have been impacted, have evacuated. I've been hearing from them by text, as I'm sure you have, Sarah, on a daily basis now. So many have been impacted by this. So our thoughts do go out to everyone in the film and TV industry and all our friends and colleagues there in LA. Is that somewhere where you're having to travel to at all anytime soon, Sarah?
Not anytime soon. However, post-pandemic, early 2022, I had come back to Scotland actually with my mother for a visit. And get out of Canada. It's safe to travel, reconnect with family. And then I was invited and nominated for awards, which I ended up winning at a small, beautiful little film festival in Peebles, Scotland, in the borders, and put together by some really beautiful friends. And so I was down there reconnecting with the film community, in London. And then I had a US work visa at the time. And I decided to use it because I had lost time on it during the pandemic as I stayed in Canada. And so I thought, well, let's keep using this US work visa and see what happens. And so went back to the US and had navigated New York and Los Angeles for some time before the pandemic, about spreading my wings as I really wanted to move into scripted work. And at a studio level, after spending the first half of my career working in a lot of documentary and factual reality broadcasting, which was a great learning experience and very financially stable for me at the time, and able to be a responsible adult, and own a property and have a mortgage, all of those checking the adult boxes things, right? And so I'm proud of myself for doing that then. But career-wise, it wasn't fulfilling anymore. It wasn't creatively fulfilling. And I'm grateful for those opportunities and proud of the work that I did, certainly, and certainly earned my stripes many, many times. And I would beg to differ that there are studio DPs who've never done the types of jobs that I've done and have them survive out there, which I don't think they could. So I'm certainly proud of myself there. And all of that skill set is transferable. And so I've always wanted to work in scripted and make movies, and very passionate about cinema. And decided to go for it. Really thought about it over the pandemic and considered, I am midlife, mid-career, and thought, do I want to stick it in this industry? Do I want to stay here for the rest of my life, if I'm so privileged to have the rest of my life, And so give it some deep thought and decided, yeah, I am a cinematographer. That's what I am. And I can't imagine doing anything else. I am a story creator, and I love collaborating, and it is my turn to work on bigger productions that are supported in a scripted and narrative space, and that's what I want. And so I decided to go for that by circling back to Los Angeles with my visa. I rode my motorcycle down from Vancouver, where my place is, and packed all my luxuries up. And was like, put all the luxuries away. Let's get on my BMW G650 GS with couple of changes of clothes and hightail down I-5 to LA and see what happens. And I literally started that trip at the beginning of June 2023 and end of May, beginning of June, and rode into LA. And the first group of people that I connected with, which I was already connected with and a member of, is Women in Media, which is a really wonderful, supportive group. And it's taking a lot of action steps to get women in front of people that can hire versus just talk about it. And so I was happy to connect with them. They do events all the time and just sort of took off from there. Cinegear is a really great, is a really great event that is all about cinematography and technology and filmmaking and panel talks and celebration and gathering of people in the ASC and all around the world internationally. And it's a lot of fun. It's a really positive space. And I was invited to attend because I was again nominated for awards for my work as a cinematographer through something called the Altitude Awards, which is something that the Women in Media group created and brought in a lot of support from companies and fellow people in the industry that are professionals working at a very high level. And it's really beautiful. And it's specifically focused, the Altitude Awards are specifically focused on women who are cinematographers and camera operators, and who are lighting gaffers. And so I just have to take a sip of my tea.
We like to go back in time too. We're right to the beginning, actually. And I'm going to take you all the way back to Scotland because you were originally your family were from Fisherow, which is Edinburgh in Scotland, and you are one of two children. You have a brother. So tell us, when you moved, of course, you were very small and you moved to Toronto at a young age. So let's talk a little bit about the very early days that you can remember when you got to Toronto and as a toddler growing up there. What are your earliest memories, Sarah?
Yeah, so sorry, I wasn't able to brief you enough before we started, so I'll tell you the story. So all of my family is Scottish, some Irish descent, some Welsh descent, and my parents, both Scottish, from Fisherow and Musselburgh, neighbouring villages on the east coast of Scotland, outside of Edinburgh, on the River Esk, lovely little, pretty little seaside place. And they were married there and became pregnant with me there. And at the last minute, when my mother was 7 months pregnant, my father decided that they should move to Canada. His parents had immigrated previously, and he had gone back and forth with his brother as a boy as well. It was a story of what happened after the Second World War with many families in Britain, between Ireland and Scotland and England and parts of Europe, different countries in Europe, where families wanted a new start and they wanted to go to a different country. Many came to America, many came to Canada. Canada is and was, at the time that my parents came over, a very young country, and still finding its feet as a country, and also trying to now properly acknowledge the Indigenous people that were here first. And that's a whole other history lesson. However, my mother and father decided to give it a go. As they say in Scotland, well, get on with it, give it a go. And off they went with me, 7 months pregnant. And then I was born around 8 months. I came early. And I think that was probably because of all of the kind of the change, right? And I was born on January 21st, 1973, in a thick winter, as southern Canada used to have very, very heavy winters. And now we have shorter winters and with less snow, thanks to climate change, which ties back into causes of what's happening in Los Angeles right now. And their life began for us over again, for them and with me. My mother said that she used to walk around the block in Toronto's West End where they rented a wee house on a wee street called Whitaker Avenue in Toronto's West End. And she said, well, I would just kind of walk around the block because there was so much snow. My sense of direction was off because I grew up next to the sea, and Lake Ontario is on the other side. So I'd get confused, and nobody understood my accent. So we just take the pram in a square and go back inside. And you are my wee buddy. And that's what we did. So that's the beginning of life, for me. Beginning in one world with the sounds of Scotland and Scottish accents and the ocean close by, and then different sounds and Scottish accents and more accents of more countries in the multicultural space that was Toronto in the 1970s.
What kind of activities did you do then as a small child out of school? Were you an outdoor child?
Always, always, yes. Lots of sports. My parents loved spending time in nature. And as they had so much access to natural beauty in Scotland, especially being close to the ocean and the beaches and the parks in Edinburgh and going to the Highlands, Scotland's quite a small landscape, and it's not far, doesn't take long to get out of a city, and so they would seek that out in Canada. And my father ended up traveling to British Columbia, where he lived for quite a time. And so my brother and I would, after my brother came along, would spend a lot of time in the mountains in British Columbia and in Ontario, in cottage country. Very dear family friends would take us up to the Muskokas and Algonquin Park. And the education system in Ontario at the time would take children on camping trips. And then we'd spend summer camp outside in the parks or, at sports camp on a lake, so lots and lots and lots of nature. Yeah.
Well, you've developed obviously a passion for movies. So I'm wondering what you were watching when you were a child. What were the earliest ones that you can think of?
Star Wars. And lots of a mix of British made television and films and movies that sort of give you the story in 1973 and the 70s and 80s. Essentially, we never had a television. And having a TV at home, cable was slowly coming to homes. We were a working class family. And my parents had separated when we were quite young. They loved each other dearly, though they were very young. They were literally like 23 and 25 years old when they immigrated and had me. And that's so young. When I think back to when I was 23 years old, I could not fathom leaving the place that you grew up and having a kid. That's a lot. And so they had different ideas about stability and environment and community and went their different ways, but loved us, always and dearly. And so my brother and I were fortunate enough to have two types of experiences, and the films that were brought in and the stories that were brought into those experiences are what was available to us in the different places that we were. And some of those stories were Indigenous stories in Canada. And between going to a powwow and learning stories from people, or seeing films. And by the time we actually bought a television, I think I was 12 or 13 years old. And that was a big deal. Mom was able to afford a TV. And we eventually got a VCR and we could get movies, you know. Mom would let us, I mean, back then too, we had small shops in the neighborhood that rented you a VCR and a videotape. So this was before Blockbuster movie shops came along where you could rent more VCRs and more videotapes. But we had one cinema in the beach of Toronto where we lived. And so it was, at the time, a beautiful little, what I would call a small town on the edge of the big city of Toronto. And it was rests on the beaches of Lake Ontario. And originally it was a cottage country for people back then. And so when I was growing up, shops were shut on Sunday. You could chuck a rock and not hit anybody because it was quiet as a mouse. And everybody was outside at the beach or at home. And we could rent a VCR from one shop in the neighborhood and you could actually rent a small TV if you didn't have a TV. And then you could rent the videos that you wanted on VHS tape and watch them on the weekend. And that was a big deal. And we would have sleepovers with all our chums in school and watch videos. And that was a big deal. You know, it was a big deal for the parents too. So the types of films that we watched were Star Wars. It was available. And it was also really exciting for us at the time. We would watch other films, a lot of American films that were available more so. Steven Spielberg films, excuse me, E.T., all the really beautifully told things of cinema of the time when I was growing up that were being made. Cinema before that, we would also watch, and so here's another part of what I would watch. My grandparents bought a TV, and we would sometimes also visit them on weekends. And they didn't rent movies or watch movies so much. But on one of the channels that they got, there were a lot of old classics that were being played. So a lot of older Elvis movies, a lot of black and white classic movies from America. And there was one channel called PBS, and PBS would play European or British stories that were available, and those would be a lot of British sitcoms. Monty Python, we watched a lot of Monty Python, and anything else like older films, Local Hero, that was actually in the 80s. We got that. Before that, I think a lot of films made in those places were local to the area because it wasn't easy to share them widely, to distribute them, right? And so, yeah, it was, a mix of that comedic side of what was coming out of Britain and some influence from Europe, which was drama, and then America with their grand stories of the imagination of science fiction and, other worlds and things like that. Yeah.
When did you start paying attention to the cinematography and noting cinematographers and who you were drawn to, particularly in their style?
I didn't know cinematography was a thing, a career. And I know I've heard many, many women say this. And that are cinematographers today. And so it's interesting to me that we share a very similar story of awareness and access, which is what we're changing today. And on a side note, for me, in my consideration of what do I want to do with the rest of my life, I choose to stay in this profession and do what I do, not only because I'm passionate about it, but because I know it makes a difference and it will continue to make a difference. And that's also part of my purpose. And so cinematography that I started to unconsciously observe as more so, I would say, as a teenager. And I'll also share the story of photography, stills photography with me too, in a moment. But cinematography, I didn't know, I knew I was looking at it, obviously, but consciously, I was not acknowledging it because I didn't know it was a separate thing from filmmaking. Filmmaking was one thing. And like production design or wardrobe or makeup, I didn't know it separated itself into different departments, light and grip and all that kind of stuff. When I was, well, I'm trying to choose a succinct path because, life stories can go in a big, wonderful, lost circle of a journey. So a couple things on that point. When I was, a kid, and then also in my early teens, one of the families that we grew up with in Canada, which is a Canadian family that are like extended family to me. They are family to me. And one of them is, they are artists. And, I'll share that in a minute too. Those kids, those two boys that we grew up with, their parents were in the arts and are in the arts, and also were very dear friends with my mother and knew my father too. And we spent a lot of time together as kids and families. And those kids were really interested in filmmaking from a sort of makeup kind of things. And through their exploration, found horror movie magazines that would show you how horror movies were made and how costumes were made and how they did the blood and the guts and the aliens and all that kind of stuff. And then started to make all that stuff when they were kids and make things with plasticine and stuff like that. And so they were more into modeling. And my brother and I used to play with them in that space. And so sometimes we would all make things in that space. And that started to make me more aware of the separation of the psychology that, I didn't have to be scared of a horror movie because it suddenly wasn't real. The curtain was pulled back and I saw how it was made. And I thought, oh, okay, well, now I can make sticky things on my face and that's funny, And so, excuse me. And we can put rubber latex on our skin and stick a toothpick in it and it looks like there's a toothpick stuck in my hand, Sorry. And so that was part of the awareness of the path of the process of. And so cinematography kind of revealed itself to me before I got into college. However, it began with stills photography for me as a child. And that influence came from my father and also my grandmother, his mother. When my grandparents immigrated and I was born, basically almost immediately after my parents came, they had purchased all new things that were not related to the Second World War. And some of those things were cameras. So in the 70s and the late 60s, they had these cameras. They had 8 millimeter film cameras, and they had these 120 cartridge rectangular cameras that you put the cartridge of film in and you push it together, slide it in and out, and it goes click, click, and then you push the button and the flash goes off and take a picture. And my Nana had a Brownie camera that I think was her mother's that I still have, actually, as a beautiful, sentimental piece of thing. And my father was a beautiful painter and always taking photographs and painting from a very early age. And he, as a profession, worked in book and magazine publishing and did practical things to make a living. But his heart was always as an artist in painting, and only really started to realize his full potential before he passed away, which is another story I'll touch on in a moment. But that influence of all those cameras being around me at a very early age, and the cameras in my face, and me being, that first generation Canadian, and that space of touching things, of having my hands on things as as an infant and a toddler, you're constantly touching things, and it was cameras. And people would give me dolls, of course. People gave me dolls. They tried to dress me up in dresses all the time. I basically would pull the dresses off and put the dolls down and touch the camera. So,
were you a bit of a tomboy?
Yes. You want to hear something else ironic is that my middle name is Thomas. And that middle name comes from my father's mother's mother. She was a Thomas. Her surname was Thomas from Wales. And so that's where a bit of Welsh is in me. And my father decided that he wanted to have that name in my name. So my full name is Sarah Thomas Moffat, and that's why I use it all the time. I don't drop my middle name.
Well, just to expand on your childhood and the cinematography, I want to come back to the cinematography, obviously, but let's look at the broader picture of your childhood. And you said you were into sports and nature and that sort of thing, but what kind of a scholar were you?
Oh, I can answer that. I was a scholar of the daydream. I was a scholar of the imagination. And I am proud of that. However, it wasn't so accepted or understood in Toronto at the time. And again, I reiterate that Canada is a very young country. And the education system when I was growing up was far less advanced than the British education system, which was well established. And my mother was a teacher, and she had already had a career before she had me. And she was quite challenged intellectually by the lack of the education system in Canada, which was something that she did everything for us to, keep us on our toes. The daydreaming part. I will also mention that daydreaming part may have in part been influenced by the fact that I was also born with a hearing loss. And I have had hearing aids since about the age of 5 or 6. And I bring that into my work today, which is something else we can talk about later, that I've been working with BSLBT and a beautiful group of people in Bristol who are making deaf-related stories. And I am working with them, and it is a very magical experience and very cathartic, in fact, this far along in my life, and I'm very grateful for them. And so, as a daydreamer, Yeah, where were we? See, there it is, the daydreaming.
Yeah, you were daydreaming in school, but what subjects were of interest to you, and what actually steered you towards your college and your interests outside of high school when you were moving on and thinking of a career, perhaps?
Yes, art. Art was the biggest interest for me because I excelled. I felt comfortable and excelled in that space. It's always challenged me that you are given a mark and a grade for a piece of artwork when the art is from another place in your existence and being. It is not a math equation. And so it's not right or wrong. That's, a different take on art. And I think, we accept that today. But when I was growing up, it was like you got an A or you got an F. And I would tend to do better in the art department than I did in other departments. And I was a very one-on-one learner and a very hands-on learner. Art was something I could do with my hands. Interestingly, I also excelled at math when I applied myself and when the teacher helped me apply myself. If I was lost in the process of group learning and curriculum, I was lost. But if I was given the time by a good teacher to tutor me after school or at recess and really work with me and also encourage me and and cheer me on and give me some moral support, then I passed with flying colors to the point where other students and other teachers would judge me and say she couldn't have possibly done that by herself and would insinuate that I cheated on things. So many students who have hearing losses and are deaf are succumb to that experience. And other people who are neurodivergent, such as people with ADHD and autism, experience this. So I know systems are changing now and more awareness is happening now. Films are being made about this now, which is really, really wonderful. And we need to keep doing that. So my, curriculum, I was interested and excelled in art, sports, and maths. I loved science. But again, I didn't have teachers that were supportive.
How about music? Did music play a part?
Oh, yeah, I love music. Thanks for reminding me of music. I love music too. I do love music. And I played the viola in grade school and elementary. I played the viola and the cello. I love the cello. And in high school, I played the saxophone. And my first class, my first year of high school, I was my homeroom, as we would call it in North America, whereas your main class was band. I had the best music teacher, Mr. Cameron, who's not alive anymore. He was a jazz musician. He played the clarinet. And he was a cool cat from the 50s, and he just, was on it all the time. So yeah, definitely the syncopation of music and the rhythm of music. My father was very, very musical. My mother was very musical. She sang as a student and as a youth. She traveled to Europe with people. She was in a band. She would sing, and she still sings on her own. She sings in choir. And my father loved different instruments and would call us up and put the phone down and play an instrument and say, how was that? And stuff. And he was a big part of a music festival in Ontario called the Mariposa Folk Music Festival, which is a really beautiful festival. He did the magazine publishing for them. And we would go to the Mariposa Folk Music Festival, very, very heavily folk music influenced, North American folk music, Scottish folk music, Celtic music, Gaelic music, bagpipes, 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 everyday bagpipes.
I want to know a little bit, because you grew up in Canada, what the religious influences might have been, indeed political, from your parents. Did they guide you in any way in either of those subjects?
That's a funny story too. My mother was raised a Catholic in Fisherell. There's a tiny, beautiful Catholic wee church called Lady of Loretto, and it was said to have been given a curse by Protestant monarchy religion that dominated Scotland eventually, and that there would never be a Catholic ordained priest in that church. And her uncle, John, was the first Catholic ordained priest in that church. And he spoke 4 languages and traveled the world. And there's a crucifix in the garden today, still with his name on it in dedication to him. And my mother still practices, but she's never been a Bible thumper, as we call them in North America. And religion for her was very, very different when she came to Canada. She tried to connect with a Catholic community here and quickly discovered that it was nothing like what she had in Scotland. And in Scotland, she would always say it was about the community and it was about the people and it was about coming together. It wasn't about military religion. And it was an open space and freedom and of choice. And they never turned anyone away. And they never controlled anyone in that sense. And I know the Catholic Church is not perfect. That's not what I'm talking about. I myself have not chosen a religion, nor will I ever. I was baptized and had a first communion for sake of my mother's interests and practice as a kid. And I also went to a Catholic elementary school in the beach because it was close to the house. And that education as well, because religion was part of our curriculum, was also an interesting experience of what people bring into it based on personal opinion versus what it actually is. And today I simply choose spiritualism as a practice of meditation and compassion and kindness. And that, I think, is enough. And I draw interest from different religions around the world, things from Buddhism, from, different cultures, different things. And my father, on the other hand, was a pagan and really didn't adopt any religion, Protestant or Catholic, in Britain ever. And he was a free spirit, certainly. And he really he made me laugh. And I only understood this when I became an adult. Because as a child, you don't understand what they're talking about. And he would say, "Hello, my little pagans. What are we going to do today?" And that was his fun way of taking us back to another time and place, where practices were different. My mother also, even within her, Catholic practice, would constantly link us to nature and the old Celtic ways and, Gael type practices of, awareness of things like the Book of Kells. Her father was of Irish descent. He was Irish, but he was born in Scotland. But Ireland was part of Britain at that time. So that's another, part of the process of migration and losing family contact and things like that. But she very much kept us aware of Irish heritage and that connection to earth and the Book of Cows and not work and um, being close to nature, and how that culture also had a lot of animal deities that represented different spiritual things, and things like smudging, which she really connected with the Indigenous community in Canada more than she did with the Catholic community, because they were more gentle, and they also had a lot of similarities to what really old practices that are pagan considered and spiritual considered of what is now Britain.
I want to go back to the turning point in your career. I know you graduated in radio and TV broadcasting from Centennial College. Was that the point where you realized you were going to make a run for cinematography, and that was the world for you?
I think so.
Tell us a little bit about that decision, and then move on to, if you would, to those early opportunities that you had in the industry.
Yeah, I think that was probably the turning point, yes. The awareness of the power of the image came for me when I was a teenager in stills photography. And that was always mentored by my father. And I must say, too, my mother was a lovely painter, and is when she practices. But she was, as a woman in the 60s, told that she could be a teacher or a nurse, not go to art school. She wanted to go to the Dundee Art College, and her father said no. And it was about survival then. I'm very grateful for my choices today, that my family has worked very hard to build different options for themselves out of those generational hand-me-downs, that I can have that freedom today, both literally freedom and choice in freedom of what I decide to do for me. And I think about that with everything I do. And so the photography was really brought into awareness of the power of the image, which is where cinematography comes in. And I would take photographs at family functions, and my father would have the negatives, the 35 millimeter film negs printed, and make pictures. And then I would, unconsciously give them to family members. And just as a little thing that I did as a young teenager. And that response from them and their reaction started to turn the light on for me of, oh, wow, there's actually a connection here. I'm not just pushing buttons, and I'm not just putting a cartridge of film in and making things click and looking through a viewfinder and holding something that I'm really interested in. I'm actually creating an emotional experience. And I think, too, because of my hearing loss, it was a safe space for me to be behind the camera, and it was a way for me to interact with people without talking to people all the time. I'm also an empath, and this is something I've learned about myself as I learn more about empaths and how to manage our energy as an adult, that people didn't teach as a child when I was growing up, because they didn't know how to teach it. And my mother is very much, my father was very much, we feel a lot. And so it's, all of that combined, my safe space was behind the camera. And so my sensitivities were protected behind the camera, and my hearing was protected behind the camera. And therefore, I was not being judged in a room for my responses when I was behind the camera. And that was how I started to figure out that this was something bigger for me, and that follow through of emotional connection, which is what cinematography is for me today. And then when I decided to go to college, I was in my early 20s. I had traveled after high school for 4 years. I worked and traveled, and I said, I don't want to go to university right away because I don't know what I want. And it's too expensive to waste time. And she said, as long as you're working and traveling or working and doing something positive, I don't mind if you don't go to school right away. And I was so grateful that she said that because it didn't force me into a situation that I saw all my friends in. And so I traveled the world into Australia and New Zealand, where I have other family, and went backpacking on my own. I worked summer jobs as a lifeguard. I was a nanny for a little while. I worked at the local community center with kids in programs. I did lots of stuff. I was a kid that had 4 jobs, you know.
Didn't I read somewhere that you were a dive master?
Yes, I am. I don't do too much of that anymore, but yes, I am. And I've done underwater cinematography as well. So that when I was decided to go to college, I was reading about different broadcasting programs. Film school, quote unquote, was not so much a thing in Toronto at the time in the 90s as it was in Los Angeles with AFI or in Britain with BFI. It wasn't really that thing yet in Canada anywhere. There was a program at one university at Ryerson that was a film-based program, but it was more so for directors. There was this cinematography kind of section, but, you know, I decided to go to a practical college because I was a practical person, and it gave me a hands-on experience. I could do internships, and I could finish in 3 years. Because I didn't really like school, I took a program that was shorter and gave me job experience versus theory experience. And so that was right for me. And I did an internship every single year in summer. I worked for CBC one year. I did a PA job on a travel show called RV Vacation Adventures one summer. And I was also getting paid for those. And then I did my last internship at a company that was making commercials in Toronto at the time called Spy Films. And and that is where I was really introduced to my first movie set, because those commercials in Toronto at the time were like mini movies. They were absolutely massive productions. And for me, it was there that I found a camera department, and there that I got into that very quickly, and saw the trajectory, and I saw the path from being a second camera assistant loader of film to focus puller to camera operator to DP. And I was like, I didn't even know how to articulate it, but I knew when I sat on a dolly when nobody was looking, it literally felt like home. It was that sensation of home. And I looked in the viewfinder and I touched the camera and I held it. It was just that resonance of me holding that camera that my father gave me as a teenager, that camera. And it was actually 11 years old when he gave me the camera. I was barely a teenager. And I still have it today.
Totally relate to that. There's a couple of places where I am where you arrive at that place and it is absolutely home to you. And obviously this is a natural environment. This is your creative world. All your artistry is coming out here. I'm wondering where the turning point was in your early career, the breakout roles, as we would say if we were the other side of the camera, but where you found were turning points and really defined your pathway.
I have to think about that for a second, because I don't know if I've had one of those breakout moments yet. But I think I feel that one is coming soon. You know.
Then think about those early opportunities then. People that were opening doors for you, or were you pushing them open?
I was definitely pushing them open. Definitely me doing all the work, and it still is today. I don't have an agent yet, and I'm open to talking to them, but or a manager. I do everything myself. And I am, in that note, grateful that I have the tenacity and the ambition and the heart to do this, and the resilience and the skills that my mother taught me as a child in a single parent family to manage yourself.
So, as well as being determined, were you also a stubborn child when you had made up your mind on something?
I would not call it stubborn. I would call it focused.
Okay.
And I laugh because I'm also an Aquarius, and I do have a birthday coming up. And apparently I'm on the first day of I'm on the cusp of Capricorn and Aquarius. Capricorn is very ambitious, and Aquarius are very humanitarian and future thinking, and noted in the past as being stubborn or determined. And I think I definitely would say unconsciously, again, as a kid growing up, because we're not aware of ourselves fully. And, I remove terms like stubborn because it has a negative connotation.
Clearly, it's worked for you, Sarah. Let's move on a little bit to some of your biggest successes, or what you would regard when you look at your reels now, what you would regard as the highlights.
Thank you. I have many. I'm very proud of the work that I've done in all genres as I focus into that next level of scripted work that I am, starting to receive opportunities in now. And I am proud of some of the documentary stories that I've done. For example, a lot of the work I did and most of the work was around women's stories, different stories around women's health and different countries, different languages, those travels and educations in communities and cultures and languages, and their experiences will stay with me forever. Places like Kenya, places like Mexico, places like Bosnia, very, very, difficult stories to tell. And, documentary is a one-person show. It is the cinematographer who is also the gaffer, the key grip, the camera assistant, the, fixer of all things. And they work with the director who's on a mission to tell a story. And you are out there in the middle of nowhere with nobody else. And that is the way most women's stories I discovered were being told, because they were also not heavily funded. And, which is another thing on diversity. So those experiences I'm very touched by. And then that led into larger budget and larger production team, reality TV opportunities in North America for History Channel, Discovery Channel, where I became a series director of photography, and I had a team of 5 crews, different, camera crews out in different parts of an environment, gathering different stories with different subjects. And I had to set the look, and I had to work with showrunners. I had to work with story producers. I had to work with executives. I had to work with post-production supervisors and manage that look across all areas and make sure it was cohesive and make sure that communication was happening. And at the same time, I was still out in the field shooting as well, communicating by satellite phone at minus 50-degree weather in the Yukon, driving my own skidoo, living in a trapper hut, or up in the Rocky Mountains, gathering stories of people prospecting for gold in the back of bear country, traveling by helicopter, shooting outside of a chopper, and also working on a really incredible show called Amazing Race Canada, which I had the honor of doing 3 seasons on as a camera operator, where I was also, when you're out there as a camera operator, you're working with a sound person, and the two of you are essentially your own field directors at the same time, and you are chasing people and you're gathering story, and you are going like a marathon for almost 30 days straight. And it is an incredible, incredible experience in the exercise of military practice within a television production. and it is an adrenaline rush and a half, and it is a camaraderie that I have never experienced before. And it taught me a lot, and I'm really grateful for that time. And I was able to make a really good living from doing those reality shows and set myself up, as a grown up, the way I wanted to set myself up and, stop renting and buy a really great place and, get into that next phase of my life. And I always did scripted shorts and some feature work and some series work for CBC on the side. And I never made a huge living at those. So now that's shifting. Now I'm taking all of my skill set and all of my experiences and really working to sail my ship into that scripted studio level space and open up that ocean of wealth for me too, because I know it's there and I also belong in those.
What next for you?
I've been doing a lot of virtual production work. Because I'm a technologist as well, I embraced in virtual production on the onset and really started to understand that more from theater because I, have an interest and some of a small background in theater as well. One of my uncles in Scotland was a lighting director for the Pitlochry Festival Theatre. And he's no longer with us, but he was a person I spent a lot of time with in the Highlands of Scotland. And we would walk up and down the rivers and he would teach me how to make gin and tonics. And we'd eat smoked salmon and go and hang out in theatre and talk about lighting. And virtual production is I see that as an advancement of that use of backdrops and how to create that space, and really flows naturally through that experience. And it's a really fascinating technology. It is a tool. It is not always to be used. It is a wonderful solution to tell stories in different ways. It's exciting. I'm learning Unreal Engine right now, and I've been doing virtual production for 3 years, and a lot of that came out of my initiative in Los Angeles, where I spent a lot of time there on my motorcycle, riding all over LA in the unbearable heat to go to virtual production studios that would welcome me and let me test things and get to know the companies that were making LED tiles and lights and, talk with technology people there and virtual production supervisors and, all kinds of technologists and engineers. And they invited me to talk on panels at SIGGRAPH and starting Pixel in London and teach with Final Pixel Academy now and do, move potentially into that virtual production VP, DP space, which is really exciting. So I really embrace all of that. I'm really excited about where that's going for me and opening doors into the studio world as well. While I also maintain my status as a cinematographer, I'm happy to do either or and both combined because it's all useful to have that communication skill set and understand what everybody's needs are in each department and be a head of department that can clearly communicate to achieve a common goal and help tell a story according to a director's vision and support that director in that process. So I'm really excited about all of that, inside and outside of the virtual production space. I'm also really excited about working with the deaf and hearing impaired community in the UK and also any other country that takes me to. It's a really, really beautiful, heartwarming experience that is helping some of my past heal. And so, sorry, it's a very, very personal space. And the stories that we now get to tell.
And I'm wondering what Sarah Thomas Moffat does in her downtime. What do you do for fun when you're not working?
I lift weights.
Good for you.
Yeah, sports. Sports, I will always be an athlete. Sports was a very big part of my childhood could because I'm a natural athlete. And my father was a really fantastic athlete, and he was a really fantastic artist. Yeah. And so he played, on a side note, if anybody in the UK is listening and you know what Port Vale is, he was drafted in his youth by Sir Stanley Matthews to play for Port Vale. And he and I think my uncle did as well for a short time. And one of our extended family friends in Scotland, a bunch of Scot boys playing for Port Vale under Sir Stanley Matthews. And there's some really fantastic black and white photographs of that time. Really proud of that. And that soccer is always in my blood. Love it. And lifting weights today is something that I started doing. So I've always been a runner. And so being in the reality TV world, my running and athleticism certainly played a part, especially on Amazing Race Canada. I started lifting weights before then and getting into more strength training for shows like Amazing Race Canada. Because if you're a runner and more of a feminine body, you don't have a lot of natural upper body mass. And so I developed that for myself. And the pandemic was really challenging because it knocked a lot of that out of me. But now I am turning all of that around into longevity. So practicing things like Qigong, which is a really wonderful version of Tai Chi, or different from Tai Chi. It's a really wonderful practice of moving meditation, balancing, getting the symmetrical sides of the brain working, and breathing exercises, meditation, weightlifting. I run less, but I do long walks and keep that cardio up. Yeah, I love it. It's my happy place for sure.
It sounds like a very well-rounded lifestyle you have, Sarah, and a very fulfilling one too. It sounds as if you're in a very good place. So I'm really grateful that you took the time to come on the podcast this week and share your journey with us, because it's been a fascinating one, and there's so much more to come, so many interests. So the very best of luck with it. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And you can find links to Sarah's website, her IMDb profile, and her social media in the show notes accompanying this episode. Just scroll down below the player, and you'll also find a full transcript of the show as well, if you prefer to read it. Now, we're doing things slightly different in this season to what we did with seasons 1 and 2, which were weekly. We're actually going bi-weekly, so you'll have 2 episodes a month. So be sure to subscribe on your podcast app so you don't miss an episode. And we now have a YouTube channel where you can watch bonus content of the episodes. That's at the Art Podcast. Don't forget, Art is with 2 A's. And we'll be adding the full show as well, so you can actually listen on YouTube to the full episode, as well as watching videos of each episode. We also have a new email address. That's the artpodcast@gmail.com. If you prefer to reach us via email, you can follow us on Instagram at the Art Podcast. We always love to hear from you, so drop us a DM or an email with suggestions for anyone you think should be a guest on the show. We would love to hear from you. My thanks again to my guest this week, Sarah Thomas Moffat, and to you for listening. I'll be back in 2 weeks' time when my guest will be the Romanian hyperrealistic artist Cințiana Iordache. So I do hope you'll join me then.